Good morning, folks. My name's Steve, and I was also in Dr. Bish's class. I worked a lot with a dog named Tico. One of our objectives in this class was to help make these shelter dogs more adoptable. Tico was found at the animal shelter in Seguin and brought to the Moshe Mansion. And he had a few problems. One of them was if he was approached by a stranger, he wouldn't run, he would roll over and pee on himself and on you if you were in the line. So anyway, through working with this dog, we read a book and we used clicker training techniques. Some days were not so good for Tico, and we were instructed just to bond with the dog, just spend time with this dog. And I witnessed what happened to this dog. He went from just scared of everyone and peeing on himself to adoptable. He would walk with a leash. He would pay attention to you. So after about 6 weeks, I went to the Moshe Mansion where we meet for class, and I said, Tico, and he was gone. And I knew at that time someone had adopted him. And I was sad, but I was really glad and elated to know that I was a part in something that made a difference in this dog's life, which was inevitably the gas chamber over there, to helping him get to a loving family where he can make a difference in their lives like animals have in mine. So I say love each other, love God's creation and all its creatures, and the world will be a better place. Thank you.
Good morning. I'll give you a minute to finish reading the passage from Genesis, because when you get to the end of it, I imagine many of you will be thinking about it and completing the story. So the man named all the animals, birds of the air, and the living creatures of the field, but for Adam, no companion who corresponded to him was found. But let's not stop there in our consideration of the relationship of humans, animals, and God. For a moment, I would like you to consider that God understood that human beings need the companionship of other beings as well as that of other humans. Animals have been among my closest companions in my sojourn on earth. I lived with cats since birth, and have shared my home with several wonderful dogs. I can't imagine my life without animals. These relationships are deeply meaningful for me, but have not always been recognized as such by others. Particularly, some of my Christian friends and relatives have questioned the spiritual value of my companionship with animals, offering biblical references to support their claims. In fact, the Bible makes few references to animals, to the relationship among humans and animals. Theologians who focus on the issues of animals and Christian faith point out that many of these references intend to make a point about God's regard for humans by comparing them to God's treatment of animals. For example, God feeds sparrows, why wouldn't he feed you? Official church teachings also offered little guidance to understand the depth of the human-animal bond. The Roman Catholic Church, into which I was born, for example, taught that animals were so different from human beings that they should be treated like things that had no souls. However, the traditions of believers complicate this approach to animals. Everyone knows that St. Francis of Assisi cared for animals. A host of other saints' holiness was recognized through acts of compassion toward animals. The imagery associated with St. Martin de Porres, for example, features a cat, a dog, a bird, and a mouse eating from the same bowl. Martin, a lay brother in the Dominican order in 17th century Peru, fed the poor of Lima and ministered to their medical needs. He also founded a hospital for animals as an extension of his work. So, if the Bible says little about animals, and official church pronunciations tend to stress that God places higher value on humans than on animals, why the focus on care for animals in popular definitions of holiness? After my lifetime of experience and a recent exploration of theological writings on animals, I suggest that a key to making sense of the relationship of God, animals, and humans is grace. Communication with animals helps human beings explore the mystery of wordless understanding, one element of grace as I understand it. Further, our companion animals give us the gift of unearned love, another element of grace. Dogs greet us enthusiastically when we arrive home, whether we pay attention to them or not. Cats brush our ankles when we need encouragement. They offer care when we are distracted by other things. We aren't doing anything to merit the gift of their affection, yet they give it freely. The deepest moments of grace I have experienced with animals, however, come when I offer service to them. From fishing a tiny butterfly out of a tight spot inside my car and lifting it up into the breeze to fly away, to giving my cat pills that he doesn't understand will cure his illness, to receiving an abandoned dog or cat into open arms when the last interaction the animal had with a human was undoubtedly uncaring, unkind, and possibly inhumane. Most recently, I experienced grace through a little black and white cat. This summer, the latest in a long string of cats showed up at my house. Once it was clear that he wasn't leaving, I had him neutered and his ear tipped in preparation for life as a community cat, vaccinated, non-reproductive, well-fed, but living on his own. He matured into a friendly cat who didn't actually have a great deal of street sense. He was particularly clueless about finding warm, safe spots to sleep when it got cold. With 6 cats inside, a 7th receiving constant care in an enclosure in my garage, and eventually 2 foster kittens, there was no room to take him in. As the night temperatures began to drop into the 30s and the 20s, I finally put blankets in a carrier in the garage and shoved him in there. When the sun went down, several nights I did this. And although it's not easy for outdoor cats to accept being in a room, let alone confined in a tiny cage for hours, night after night, this kitty never complained. My father had met him and eventually decided to adopt him. But how are we going to get him to Florida? Here's where the grace really begins to flow. I contacted an acquaintance in Florida who arranges transport chains for rescue cats, and it turned out that 2 older kitties had been rescued from a shelter and were just waiting for a ride from Miami to McAllen. We would trade kitties. Petey and I traveled together to New Orleans, where he spent his first night in a real room. After he quietly checked out every corner, he jumped on the bed and he looked up at me. He wrapped himself around me and pressed his little body against my hip. I saw him relax, and I began to cry. Later, he curled up on my chest. Again, I felt the grace of his trust as he rose and fell with my breathing. In the night, he stretched out beside me on the bed, experiencing the safety of a warm room and the comfort of a human sleeping companion for the first time. All 21 of the people involved in connecting Petey and Sarah and Chloe with people who wanted to love and care for them described some elements of grace in their encounters with the cats. 14 TLU students, including Stephen and Kenna, offered service to companion animals in the fall semester as a service learning project for Leadership for Social Change. Each of the students could tell a story like theirs or like mine, in which our hearts opened to grace through our relationships with dogs whose lives were extended through the grace of rescue. Most of us could also tell similar stories about moments of deep grace shared with dogs, cats, horses, birds, guinea pigs, and other wild and domestic animals. I imagine many of you have felt this grace. And I invite you to jot down your stories on some Post-it notes we have in the back of the sanctuary after chapel as you leave, to make a tangible recognition of the sacred in the relationship of God, animals, and humans.